Sure. Ready?
Great.
Welcome to another
Thank you, Catherine.
virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today I'm delighted to have with us debut author Jennifer K. Breedlove, whose new book, Murder Will Out, is available in fine bookstores like the Poison Pen. We do have a limited number of signed copies by the author available for purchase. If you'd like a copy of Murder Will Out, please give us a call or go online after the event. We'll be happy to put a copy in the mail or hold one for you to pick up. Now I'd like to welcome Jennifer K. Breedlove.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. Um, Murder Will Out is your debut book, your first book. But before you wrote the book, you had another life as Jennifer. What can you tell us about pre-writing Jennifer?
Um, pre Pre-professional writing Jennifer, because little Jennifer just wrote all the time and was that kid with the notebook all the time.
Ah,
But I never really settled into writing and looked at it as something. It was just something I loved to do. And then in high school, I discovered that I was actually a fair musician and moved forward and was able to build a career as a musician, first as a pianist, and then as a church musician. So I was a professional full-time church musician for about 30 years.
well,
Um, then I went back for my doctorate, and now I also conduct choruses in a university. So
when did you decide, okay, I really want to pursue writing seriously? And what was it like getting Murder Will Out into print?
it was funny because, even as I literally just described, I wasn't really writing. I
Mhm.
pursued a career as a musician. I was still writing, and I wrote a couple of books, music education for adults, for adult volunteers, kinds of things. Lots of articles. I edited a church music magazine. And somehow all this time I still wasn't thinking of myself as a writer. And at some point, actually, a friend of mine who was with me at my launch event the other night wrote a novel, polished a novel, found an agent, got published, and I told her, it's like that was the first time it had ever occurred to me. It's like, oh my gosh, this is something people do. People I know do this. And then another of my friends did it.
Wow.
And I sort of started thinking, why am I mean, I loved writing what I was writing, but I used to love sitting down, writing a short story, writing fiction, writing an essay, writing a poem. Why did I stop doing that? And so around, I guess 2018, 2019 was when I started to carve out writing time and
Mhm.
actually, not let faculty meetings or other things get in the way. This is the time when I write. Um, and it was wonderful and it was fun. But then when the pandemic hit and all music shut down for like a
Well,
couple of years, and especially as a choral musician, as a singer, we were shut down for a really long time. And publishing and composing wasn't happening because nobody was singing our music because nobody could sing. And that was when both I had time all of a sudden and my creative self was kind of starving. It's like, you need to do something. And that was when I kind of was like, first I said, I think I'm going to write a novel. And then I said to myself, I have no idea how to write a novel. I think I'm going to learn how to write a novel. So I started digging into, story structure and, reading with the idea of how is this put together, looking for technique. And so I actually approached this book not initially as I want this to be a finished book, but I want to learn how to do this because I've read mystery novels and thrillers all my life, all the way back, and loved them. And so I had a pretty good sense of how they work and how much fun they are. And so as a result, this is my first novel, but I probably wrote it 3 or 4 times. I did several page one rewrites. I get to the end, I'm like, okay, so many things don't work. And then I went back and I started again. And oh my gosh, I have learned so much. And now when I write, it's so different from when it was when I started that book. It just feels better. It's so much more comfortable. I still love it.
what made you decide I'm going to submit it to the St. Martin's contest? And what did that contest do for you, essentially?
Well, the after I had finished the novel the fourth or fifth time and polished it and edited it, I just entered the process that many writers do, which is, going, I joined Query Tracker and
Mhm.
began a hunt for an agent in the hopes that I could seek publication. And at the same time, I was looking out, are there any competitions? And I entered, there were three or four first mystery novel or first crime novel competitions, and I entered them all. A couple of them I entered twice. One of them I made finalist on.
Oh,
But it had been months and months and months, and it had been fairly quiet. Um, and I hadn't gotten as much response as I had sort of dreamed of. You know, you write the novel and you just hope that everyone will be, this is great, and
yeah.
publish it. Didn't happen. So, and I had actually gotten to the point where I was beginning to think, okay, when I wrote this novel to teach me how to write a novel. And I love this book and I am proud of this book, and it has done what I needed it to do. And I don't need to, so it wasn't just about like, I was proud of it, whatever happened to it. And I began to think, okay, maybe I will lay this one to the side and work on something new. And I had already some other projects. Um, and then we were driving back from Minnesota,
Mhm.
where my daughter goes to school, in April in a blizzard, because Minnesota in April.
Mhm.
And I got the phone call from Minotaur. I had almost forgotten that contest had happened. I had sort of like, that you enter the contest, nothing's going to happen. And my editor was on the other end, and she said, we would like to publish your book. And we would like you to be our winner of the contest this year. We would like to publish your book. Um, we would like you to come to the Edgar Awards. And so I got to go to the Edgars and like rub elbows with all of these amazing writers. Um, and I was able to get an agent, and we worked through this process. That was 2 years ago. So this novel that I had polished and worked, it still had a lot of work to be done. And Maddie, my editor, is just brilliant with impeccable taste about, knowing what's going to work in a novel of this sort. And so, yeah, the last couple of years have been both trying to move forward with my own writing and just continue to make this book the best it could possibly be.
What can you tell readers about the book? What would you like them to know about it? And in addition to that, one thing I discovered about you that I thought was really interesting was when you were working on the book, you had to also work on your query pitching, and that kind of honed your skills at being able to talk about the book.
Well, John, it honed my skills at being able to write about the book. I'm still not
Right.
very good at talking about it, but and I know you're supposed to memorize your elevator pitch, and I've never been good at
Mhm.
that. But the novel is about a young woman who is a graduate student, organist, musicologist, who is practicing organ one day, and she gets a letter from her estranged godmother asking her if she would come back, asking Willow if she would come back to this island where they had spent summers together for many years. And then one day, 15 years ago, it just stopped, and she never heard from her godmother again, and she never knew why. And so this had been this wound that Willow had carried with her
Mhm.
um, all this time. And so, of course, she went back because she also found out between the time the letter arrived, between the time the letter was written and when it arrived, that her godmother had passed away. And
Mhm.
so she went back to kind of try and be there for this one last thing to play for her memorial service. But all through that, finding out that her godmother had inherited this giant old mansion, and the heirs to that mansion keep dying very naturally, but it's happening a lot, and bad things happen to the people who inherit that house. And so Willow, she wants to find out what happened to her godmother, and so she goes and visits the house and discovers how very haunted this house is. It's full of ghosts with agency and opinions and a lot of things to say. And so she tries to figure out, she and her new friends and the ghosts try to figure out who is responsible for all of these deaths.
Often a writer will either consciously or unconsciously borrow elements from their own experience, their own life when they're creating a book. I get the sense that there are some things in Murder Will Out that you did draw upon from your own life.
When I was young, we vacationed in that part of down East Maine, sort of near Acadia, Bar Harbor, Mount Desert Island, pretty much every summer, and camped there. And then when my parents retired, um, I think most people's parents retire south. Mine retired north to Maine.
Mhm.
And they got a little log cabin, which is the model for the cabin in the novel, and became part of the community there. My mother is both of them are former chemistry professors. My mother is now a ceramic artist. And so she sells her pottery at Islesford Pottery in Maine, which is, again, that is sort of the model for Rena's pottery shop in the book. And so in the years since then, going to visit my parents has been going to not just be a tourist or a summer person in this area, but to actually get to know some of the people in the community. So I drew on that a lot for the book.
And I'm guessing that you also kind of were able to tap into your own experiences as a musician, creating Willow as a musician. And you had written something that I thought was interesting because as a non-musician, I didn't quite grasp it, but you might be able to shed some light on it. You said that Willow can utilize her ear-brain connection to discern patterns. What exactly does that mean?
It is one of those things that's really hard to describe,
Okay.
but at least the way I experience the world, I experience it much more by sound and the way sound arranges itself around me than I do visually. You know,
Okay.
there's that thought experiment that some people say. It's like, well, if you had to go through the rest of your life without your eyes or without your ears, which would you pick? Sounds like most people say, oh, well, I would need to keep my eyes. For me, if I don't have my ears, they're just so much a part of how I experience the world. And I think it's very similar to the way you see patterns, visual patterns, the oral patterns and
Mhm.
the way and memory and time moving forward and backward it just becomes such a part of the way I experience the world. I am not as good at it as Willow. She is much better at it. That aspect of her is modeled more after some musicians I know who really, really have that attuned kind of ear.
When you were writing the book and as it went into publication, there's always this concern on the part of publishers and probably authors too. How do you get the book out to readers? How do you market it? How do you package it? How does the reader slot it into their own experiences? And I know Murder Will Out is sometimes called a cozy, and it does have elements of that in, or cozy adjacent, but it also in some ways is not quite sure grandmother's cozy, I guess you would say. Can you talk a little bit about, did you get pushback when you wanted to incorporate some supernatural elements into the story? Is that something that you can see as kind of living comfortably within this subgenre?
It's interesting. At the beginning, again, the first time I tried to write the book, I deliberately wanted to make it a cozy, and it didn't want to be one.
Okay.
It it just shifted out of that mode. And then the second time it's like, okay, well, I'll try something a little more literary. Also did not work at all. So by the time the book left my hands, it kind of was what it was. And I think that might have been one of the challenging things about it is it doesn't slot neatly into any category. But on the other hand, it seems like there are more and more books like that. This kind of mystery is having its day. Jess Armstrong's The Curse of Penrith Hall,
Oh, they're so
her,
good. Yeah.
yeah, the Ruby Vaughan mysteries. And there's that element of mysticism in there, and they're historical, but they're not cozy, but they have that character interconnected charm to them. I
Mhm.
love Ruby. She's messy and she's wild and the characters are awesome, um but it doesn't slot as neatly as some do. Olivia Black, A New
Mhm.
Lease on Death and Death at the Door, the Ruby Vaughn, that's about, this woman in her 40s who dies in her apartment and haunts it after her death. And then this young Gen Z girl who comes and lives there, and they learn how to communicate with each other and become friends, and they solve mysteries together. And those are not cozy. They have, again, that sort of character driven charm, I think that a lot of cozies do, but it's grittier and it's Boston and the crimes are
Mhm.
a little more, just a little more
Out there.
violent out there.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like the cozy adjacent mystery is having a day, maybe. I hope so, because I mean, I love to read them. And
Mhm.
And apparently that's what I like to write.
There's a lot of blurring, I think, going on between all the genres, even within mystery subgenres. I will say for anyone who hasn't read the book, if you love cozies, you're not going to be shocked by Murder Will Out. There's no graphic language or graphic violence or anything like that in the book. It does have a lot of the things readers love about a cozy, but you also bring in some other elements to it. Um, in some ways, I think people sometimes forget that this has been going on for a while, this mixing, blurring, blending of genres. One thing it reminded me of was Nancy Atherton's Antiquity series, which has been going for like 20 plus years, I think. And there's definitely the ghostly element to her stories, plus kind of the small, isolated setting charm of characters. But also, I think your book draws upon another subgenre, the gothic, because you
Mhm.
have the quintessential house that's always a part of a gothic, and kind of there's a little bit of a romantic element to the story, which you kind of can look to in a gothic. Did that come from your own experiences as a reader and wanting to do that?
Um, we were actually talking when we talked before we came on. When I was younger, I read a lot of Barbara Michaels,
Mhm.
and she, in her books, again, also sort of had that. They were most of them, the ones I remember at least, were more modern, but they always had this sort of gothic-y tinge. And sometimes there were actual ghosts, sometimes there were people pretending to be ghosts, sometimes both. So that I think was I grew up on those books so much, and I did not set out to write a Gothic novel, but when someone pointed out to me, it's like, oh, this is no, this really isn't as much a cozy as it is like a lighter modern Gothic novel. And at that point, I went out and I tried to read every lighter modern Gothic book I could possibly find, and that's how I discovered just some wonderful authors. And so,
Talk about the actual writing process a little bit too. You've gone into that a bit, but um, my impression as a reader is that in some ways, writing mysteries, suspense, things like that are easier because there is a structure. You have to know who the victim is, who the suspects are, when to plant the clues. But I've been surprised by the number of authors who have said, I have no idea, I just start and hope it all comes together in the end. What was the process of writing a mystery like for you?
I am more of a plotter than a seat
Okay.
of the pants writer. I have to start. For me, it's more like starting with like broad strokes and then filling them in. Where I always start where I know who did it, what they did, and why is usually I always kind of start there and then kind of try to craft it retroactively and forward and figure out what some of the clues will be and who the red herrings will be. Um, when I learned, I think it was Jane Kalmus, who does just wonderful materials on structuring mysteries, who's like basically, every red herring, that's a subplot. So
Oh,
if you think of your red herrings as subplots and then you tie that subplot off and it's over, you have tied up your red herring. That
mm,
that resonated really well for me. Um, I do a lot of going back through again and again. As I said, I finished it the first time and then read it through and look for the places where things really did work well and tried to kind of backtrack. And if there was a reveal or a clue that didn't feel quite right, I'd be like, okay, where can I go back in the past to highlight that and clarify and make it, I tried to do the fair laying out of clues so that someone really could follow the road and then try to keep them from being able to do it, of course. But
that's the delicate balance you have to maintain
yeah.
as a writer. Um, I'm also often intrigued by authors who have this place this importance on a character name. They can't really do anything with the story until the character is set in their mind. And your character of Willow kind of took a little bit of a journey in terms of her name, didn't she?
She did. She did. Yeah. It was the first time I on the whole first draft. First of all, the first draft was in first person,
Mm.
whereas now it is in a third person with, shifting point of view to different characters. But her name was Ellen.
Oh,
And, and it was kind of, I'm not sure why, but it was the idea that she was very, very practical. not particularly dreamy, kind of solid. She still had that element that Willow has of kind of wanting to fade into the background a little, not wanting to put herself forward. And one of the problems I ran into as I finished the book the first time, or even partway through, was she was kind of boring. I had all of these really interesting characters around her, but my main character wasn't, she's what I couldn't get inside of her. And if I couldn't, there was no way anyone else would. And in the end, I didn't change her name because Ellen, I thought, well, Ellen isn't the right name for her. I changed it because I realized also I had like five characters whose names started with E. And that's not a good idea. Um, so there's Effie and there's Efric and there's Ellen and there's Irene and then there's Eleanor. There were all of these names. And so I started playing around with her name. And once, I think my kids helped me with this, but once we hit on Willow, it just locked in and it felt really good. And her character changed because Ellen has that sort of solidity. And if there are Ellens listening who are like, that's not true, I apologize. This was my Ellen, at least. But Willow, the idea of the willow as that tree that moves and bends is still rooted, but, and also sort of has that lingering sorrow image to it. And then her last name was Stone. So we've got willow, this flexible, after this flexible tree and this sort of grounded stone. All of a sudden, this name made her really interesting. And her character changed and her appearance changed. And I found her. So clearly she was supposed to be Willow the whole time, but yeah.
You have written other things, as you mentioned, including music, and I'm wondering, did the skills you possess as a musician in some ways also transfer to your writing as a novelist? Because I'm thinking in music, you're concerned about tempo and pacing and timing and all these and harmony. Is that something you bring with you when you write fiction?
Um, I think I really do, both on a macro and a micro level. Although one of the I don't I'm not good at short stories. They don't come natural to me, whereas all of my choral compositions have been on the shorter side. I can't write a long piece of music to save my life, but the novel spins out very easily. But well, not that easily. But I think it's twofold. One is just the attention to, yeah, pacing and melody and line that, I've talked about this in some places that to me, the prose I love to read is prose that kind of sings. Even as as you hear it, you could hear it singing if it's read aloud. And maybe this is part of that brain ear connection. When I read on the page and there's someone whose prose just sings beautifully and nothing sticks out. And if you moved one word, the line would be thrown out of balance. I'm rereading Rebecca now, Daphne du Maurier, for probably the fifth time. That is the way her prose sings. And it's not complicated and it's not flowery, but it's absolutely beautiful.
Hmm.
And so I strive for that. Every time I go back and read Rebecca, I'm like, oh, I need to work harder. But and then also in terms of pacing and structure and balance that, as you say, tempo and rhythm, realizing, from a logical sense, you can't have, one grouchy dialogue heavy scene next to another, then next to a really spooky scene, and then another really spooky scene, that the variety and the balance need to move around well so that the architecture can stand up. Otherwise, it kind of tilts. So story structure has become one of my favorite things to nerd out about. I love it.
It shows in the book. It's very well structured. Let's talk about the setting a little bit because I'm under the impression that this is going to be a series, or at least there's going to be possibly more books in it, but you've set it on an island. So I'm wondering, how are you going to overcome what we call the Cabot Cove syndrome, where you keep killing people off and eventually there's no one left?
Um, I've got two ways already in my head for that. One, having made the island sort of a tourist destination,
Okay.
And we see even in this book, there's that tension between, the locals who just love this simple beauty of their island and their way of life, and the fact that it's really hard to make a living, without, and when when tourists come, it makes, it's harder to get around and there's too many people, but that is also economically really, really important to the island. So, I mean, to many of those communities in that area. And so Little North Island, which it's a fictional island, it's not a real place, but kind of trying to play with that. So on the one hand, you've got tourists. On the other, that's the other reason that I made Willow an organist. Because one of the things, and this is the thing I've been joking about for years, because I've played for hundreds of weddings and funerals and baptisms. Um, and there's a lot. I'll just say I could tell some stories. I won't. And there's a lot of really, I mean, I love doing them actually. A lot. I know some musicians are like, oh no, more weddings. I love doing weddings, because you get to be with families at these really just important, and emotion-filled moments. These are like life passage moments, and you get to be a part of that and walk that with them. At the same time, those life passage moments, there could be a lot of emotion happening, and a lot of stuff comes up. Um, Usually it goes smoothly. There, I've done some weddings and I've done some funerals where just the tension in the air, it's like you feel like you could get an electric shock if you moved wrong, because there's so much tension in the room. So, um, there, I'm hoping that the combination of, tourists coming to the island and maybe weddings being held on the island that Willow gets to play for, and to get connected with these families that come from away, and maybe something happens and we don't have to doesn't have to happen to the locals. So,
We've talked about the supernatural element in the story of the ghosts. How, what's your philosophy in that in terms of how did you want to incorporate? Because you can have a very gentle presence like the ghost in Mrs. Murr, or you can have something very much more harder edged and spooky. How did you kind of decide this is how I want to present my view of the ghost world?
I think, and I've said this before, I know, but that, the way I look at the supernatural in general is as though I don't really believe that the supernatural is supernatural. I just think we don't understand it yet. And we
Mm,
don't have as much of a knowledge about the way the natural empirical world functions as maybe we think we do. I think we have even less of an understanding of how the human brain works and how human interconnectedness works. Um, so, you know, when people ask me, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I'm kind of like, "Well," which you didn't, but I mean, it's like,
mm,
oh, I can't say that I disbelieve in them. I don't think I've ever seen one, but I have walked into rooms and buildings and just kind of had this feeling of something else being there, or something in this place is wrong. I need to leave. And it could be any number of things. But, and so many people have experiences like that. And so I'm like, who am I to say? As far as these particular ghosts, I do feel like, and this is getting away from anything empirical. I do believe in some way that places can hold memories, that things that happen in a place, in, whether it's a house or an island, or, that somehow the things that have happened there don't go away all the way. And I think that memory is one of the most amazing things that humanity has. And the ability to call, sometimes when I mean, I still have a little bottle of, it's got this much in it, of the perfume that my grandmother used to wear. And when I smell that, it's like grandma's back. And just these connections, these sensory connections through memory and experience that tie us to the past, are just really, really powerful. And so I took that and I just dialed it up way, way, way farther. And this house has actually, the generations of people who lived there are kind of still there under the
mm.
right circumstances with the right people.
All of your characters, both Willow and the secondary cast, are very memorable, but was there one particular character who gave you more problems than the others when it came time to write Murder Will Out?
Um,
Or
I
were they
mean,
all
in a
difficult in their own
way,
way?
well, there were a number of characters, the characters that I couldn't get inside of by the end of the first draft. I I had to look, it's like, do I need that character at all? And so there used to be more characters than there are now. And so some of them just kind of slipped away. Um, I one character, probably my favorite character in the book is, curmudgeonly old Gerald Talbot, who was
Mhm.
the nephew of the previous heir and who thought he was going to get the house and then he didn't. And he is crabby and he's grumpy and he's noisy and he's rude. And initially, like again in early drafts, he always had this beautiful, very, very young wife who was not much
Mhm.
older than Willow. And actually, I did have a very hard time figuring her out. But one of the things I do when I run into that is I do a lot of extra writing and discovery writing, and I write scenes that very likely will never go in the book. And I mean, again, for her, it was, she's beautiful and elegant and smooth blonde hair. And the first thing she did that made me go, oh, that's interesting, is, Willow is introduced to her at the memorial reception, and Willow sort of hesitantly holds out her hand. And Naomi takes a glass of wine and says, here, you're going to need this. And I was like, oh, I like you. And then later, the two of them are in a bar, and the waiter comes, and we figure they're probably going to order a beer or order a drink. And Naomi is like, "I've had a terrible day, and I haven't had carbs in 8 years. I want a brownie sundae." And I was just like, okay, suddenly you have just become this really interesting person. And from there on out, that was the moment when she became a really major character in the book. And yeah, I like her. Suddenly I liked her. Even the awful ones, I have to like them a little, or I have trouble with them.
Yeah, I mean, and they always say that every antagonist or villain is the hero of his or her own story. You just have to see it
Yeah.
from their angle. You mentioned having to write and then rewrite things, and I think you also likened it to practicing scales as a pianist.
Yeah. Sort of the idea that, I mean, again, as a musician, the things that you produce are they're bound to time. So it's like after you've learned a piece and performed a piece, maybe you have a recording of it, but music like only exists while it's being created. So this shift to writing where you write something and then it's still there when you're done is I still don't think I've fully embraced that. I mean, of course I understand it, but so when I approach writing, I approach it very much like doing those scales or taking a little chunk out of a piece and playing it. If there's a part where it's moved really, really fast and I can't play it, you might slow it down. You might change the rhythm. You might, play it in a different key sometimes. You might improvise on it, just all kinds of tricks to help you find your way into the center of a piece. When I was in college, it was Beethoven that got me every time. Every Beethoven sonata I played, and I had to play a lot of them. I would spend the first two-thirds of the semester fighting this piece tooth and nail and doing all of the things and not understanding it. And then one day I'd be like, my God, this is brilliant. Beethoven is the best. And then suddenly I would understand the piece. I still couldn't play it well enough and needed to practice. But so I guess my point is that I don't think any words are ever wasted as a writer. So I don't view every word I put down as a word that's going to be part of the novel. A lot of the words I write, I know as I'm writing them are going to disappear. I mean, none of you want to read the just pages and pages of Willow exploring Cameron House for the first time and just walking room to room and looking at things. And it was, but I never meant that to go in the book that way, but I needed to see it through her eyes. So I had to write it that way. And now there's just tiny little bits of that left, but I know what the house looks like.
I think that kind of also ties into your writing philosophy of you need to know when to start your book and you need to know what to cut.
Yep. The people who know me, the people who have, worked through and, I have my writing group and oh God, my kids, my family, they know how many beginnings this book had. I literally, I think I might have had a total of like 15 or 20 different chapter ones or prologues from different points of view, starting at different moments. At one point, what is now chapter two was the first chapter. At another point, what is now chapter one was the first chapter, and there was no prologue. That this particular prologue, which is sort of from the point of view of the house and wanting to introduce the house right up front, was a fairly late entry. There were times when I wrote back months and months to her godmother, Sue, and, in the house, so there are all of these scenes and all of these places that none of them got used, or some of them got used, but most did not. But I couldn't have gotten to the beginning that is the right beginning if I hadn't written all those. So yeah, I'm a fan of, people say, don't start your story too early. I'm like, well, start it wherever you want. But then once you do that, I think Anne Lamott in her book, The Bird by Bird, about writing, she talks about that once there's a writing prompt and you're just supposed to like write about one day in recess or something. And, so it's just talking, writing, 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 writing. And then there's this kid with a bologna sandwich that has exactly one slice of bologna. And she explains the only socially acceptable way for a grade schooler in her school to have a bologna sandwich. And she said, I didn't think that was going to be important. But when I wrote it, I was like, wait, there's juice there. There's something there that's important. But you have to write a lot of stuff. I have to at least write a lot of stuff to find those moments. And then once they're there, it's really fun to sort of expand them out.
Now that your first book, your first published book, is about to either hit bookstores or is already there in bookstores and libraries, what do you wish you know now as a writer that if you could go back in time, you'd say, Deborah, or I'm sorry, not Deborah, Jennifer, this is what you need to know as you're starting out.
Maybe, and of course, this is the thing I have to remind myself or tell myself all the time, um, to not worry so much about getting it right.
Hmm.
And, thinking a lot about, it's like, well, what's the market and what do we need and how's it going to be? And I'm sending my query packet to all of these agents and I'm not getting enough responses. I'm not getting, many fulls. That must mean that my query packet is horrible or it hasn't, because when I did find my agent, it was wonderful. She immediately was like, oh, I'm all over this book. This is a really good book. So and that it'll all work out kind of the way it's supposed to. Um, and I think I would say that even if my book were not in bookstores now, even if I had gotten this book as far as I could get it, and this wasn't the one, I would still feel the same way about, that I'd be like, Jennifer, write the book you need to write and make it the best book you can. That's the thing you can control. Because I spent a lot of energy trying to worry about things that I couldn't control. And but I can write. I should just maybe do that.
I think that's actually a very smart piece of advice for aspiring writers because there are things you can control, there are things you can't. And as much as we want to think that writing the perfect book is a guarantee of getting it published, there's still that element of timing and luck. And sometimes you haven't hit the right agent, you haven't hit the right publisher. They're on vacation, they miss your manuscript, but then a year later somebody finds it.
Yeah. And I have some friends who are working on just some beautiful, beautiful novels that the market isn't quite doing right now.
Mhm.
And that doesn't make them less wonderful. And maybe in 2 years or 5 years, then the time for that will come. And yeah, I fully appreciate just the good fortune and the way things lined up that allow me to be here right now. But I mean, I'm just so happy I did write. If I could go back further in time, I would have told myself not to stop writing fiction
Mhm.
because it was too much fun.
That's that's the other important element. You have to enjoy what you're doing, or why
Yeah.
are you doing it? You wrote recently about something that I had, I guess, been unconsciously thinking about or kind of mulling over, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Sometimes it seems, and you can choose your word here, but frivolous or not important to be reading things that are light mysteries when the world seems to be crashing down around us. And you kind of feel guilty, like I should be writing to my senator, I should be marching down the street, I should be doing all these things, but I'm escaping into a book. But why is that important?
Um, yeah, I think, I mean, again, so the more evident answer is that, it's like we can't be on full, you know,
Hmm.
you know,
Throttle all the time.
all the time and
Yeah.
need to kind of take a break and step back. Um, and in fact, might have been, I think it might have been Michael Moore even who said this, but he was, talking about being a singer in a choir. If anyone has sung in a choir, when you've got these really, really long phrases that no individual can possibly sing to the
Mhm.
end, when you have a section, you sing as far as you can, and then you drop out for a second, take a breath, and come back in. And the
Mhm.
people around you can do the same thing. It's called staggered breathing, and it can't be heard from outside. It just sounds like the full sound is happening all the time. But that it's how important it is to take a moment back, get the old air out, get the new air in, and join the sound again. Um, but I also think that with these books, um, mystery novels in particular. I mean, thrillers to some example, but the idea of these puzzle mysteries where, by the end, it's not just about, when we think about what are the stakes, that the stakes, is it about saving a life? Is it about escaping the monster? In horror, it's about can you escape the monster? And but in mysteries, it's about finding justice and restoring balance to a family, to a community, to something that someone has yoinked it all out of balance and everything's shaky, and through the work of whoever your detective is, whoever your sleuth is, they shine light on that. They can shine light on what happened. As Chaucer said, murder will out. It will not hide. The truth will come out. And then balance and justice can be restored. And so I feel like in one of the reasons, at least for me, why I love these mysteries and why I actually think they're important is that they give us sort of a vision and almost like a rehearsal of what these ordinary people can do. You've got, someone who doesn't have the resources of the police department um, you know, or the badge or some official way, but something's wrong, something is unjust, something is out of balance, and they can do something to help right it. And I think when we read, I don't think reading is just something to step out of the world. I know I was changed by everything I've read, and what we read changes us, and it helps put us in. It makes us think. It makes us think about, maybe even if we're not thinking consciously, what would I do in this situation? It gives us a different way of looking at the world, and hopefully a way of seeing a time when, if there's a moment when what gifts I have can help make the world better, I'm going to do it. I don't know.
And in addition to all those things, it's okay sometimes to need a break too. Even if
Yes.
you, whether it's a television show, a movie, a book, or something like that, you need to also think about your own self too, and that's somehow important in the scheme of things. You can say as much as you'd like about my next question, or as little, because I know you're just in the process of seeing your first book published, but do you want to say anything about what's coming next from you as an author?
Um, at this point, I mean, there's not a whole lot I can say. Um, just, anything. I mean, I am still, we're in conversations about further Little North books. Um, I have all kinds of dastardly plans ahead for for these people, because, and the thing too is with this, this cast of characters, we're getting to know the living humans a good bit. But if you think about it, we don't know much about them and what brought them to the island. And then we've got this house with generations of ghosts who all died of something. And, we don't know we don't know how they got there. So my sort of the way I'm conceiving of the partnership of this island and this house and the present and the past is, in the hope that there can be some, real life present mystery to be solved that then resonates with something that happened in the house and calls forth some other ghost, either that we've met but don't know much about, or that we have not met yet. I know a lot more of them than you do at this point because of all the words I've written. There's some really interesting people in that house.
Well, I guess this would be a good point to interject and say for those tuning in, if you want more stories from Jennifer, you need to buy her new book, whether it's through the Poison Pen or through your own local independent bookstore. And here's where I'll also throw something out because a lot of readers may not realize this, but library sales are important to authors. And times are difficult financially for all of us. So if you can't afford necessarily a new book every month, you can always go into your local public library, wherever it is, and say, have you ordered Murder Will Out? I would like to read this book. And many libraries take that into consideration when purchasing.
Librarians are superheroes. Libraries are the best places in the world. I wrote a lot of this book in a library, actually.
Well,
Yeah.
um, now, should readers want to be the first to find out what's next from you, are you on social media?
Yes, I am on Instagram at Jennifer K. Breedlove. That's the best way I mean, I'm also on a few others. I'm on Blue Sky as JK Breedlove. But those are my main places.
We do have time for a few questions from some of your many fans that are tuning in virtually. I think you kind of may have touched upon this, but maybe you can clarify it or solidify it. Titles are important to books. They can set the tone. What was the origin for Murder Will Out? Was that actually from Chaucer?
That is from Chaucer. And I don't think this is too spoilery to say, but as I said, the house is full of ghosts who have different ways and levels and abilities to communicate with the living. And Willow, can't say meets because again, there's this one ghost who only communicates through notes, typed notes with literary quotes. And so when that ghost needs to express something, it's expressed in a literary quote on a piece of paper that's dropped in some random spot in the house. And so have these almost like little conversations where Willow is trying to figure out, A, where did this quote come from? B, what does it mean? And at a key moment in the book where Willow is like, why am I doing this? And I don't think this is a spoiler because if this didn't happen, there wouldn't be a book. I don't know what I'm doing here. Should I just go home? And she gets the note that says murder will out, follow the quest, which is a different one. And then murder will out, that the truth will come to light. And so it's this invisible, unseen ghost that sort of helps prod her along. And that's where the title comes from.
Another one of your fans wanted to know if there is an audio version of Murder Will Out.
There is, yeah. Gail Shahan recorded it. Beautiful. She did a beautiful job. It is available as an audiobook. I think from all the same places the print book would be.
Another person brings up an interesting topic that you may or may not want to address, but that's the role of AI in publishing and writing, artificial intelligence.
Um, I think what I think most writers think, which is that again, and having talked about, melody and song and construction, I think more than anything, and again, I know it may sound, I don't know, disingenuous, but that as someone who is now published, to be saying that it's not ultimately the creation of art can't just be about getting it published and getting it out there. I deeply, deeply believe and have always believed that human beings are designed to create art, something inside of us, the whole mind, heart, ears, senses, experience, time. We're designed to take those things in and create something that we find beautiful or expressive or important in some way, that we interpret our world by producing art. And so the idea of skipping the fun part to produce something, I don't, it doesn't quite compute for me. I think, I mean, making art of any kind, even, I mean, even, bad art, I don't even, I put air quotes around it, because if it's art from, that comes from the art making place in you, it's important to make it. I mean, I've told, I've told students this, I've said this a lot, that I think everybody has a story to tell, whether it's only one story or many stories, but you're the only one who can tell it. And if you don't tell the story that's in you to tell, that story never comes to be, it never exists. And so I feel very tender, I think, about, making space for those delicate, afraid stories in this world where it seems like we're all surrounded by everything has to be perfect and flawless. Like as a musician, there's this idea that, oh, the only people who can make music are, professionals, trained. It's like, no, everybody should sing.
Mhm.
I love working with children's choirs. I love working with volunteer adults. I love working with professionals, but the making of art and the creating of things, it's one of the best things about being human. So, sorry, you probably didn't want that entire long rant about,
No,
you know,
I think it's important to say that, especially
yeah.
readers also need to kind of take that into account because as a reader myself, I want my authors to put their blood, their sweat, and their tears into what they're doing because I'm giving you my time and my money. So I don't want something cranked out by a computer somewhere. I want to see what you've done.
Yeah. And if I can say too, like as a mystery author, one of the ways that I look at this whole thing too is that there's the mystery in the book itself that your characters are solving, but the mystery, there's also the puzzle that is between me and the reader. And so, and I think that's why I felt so much more comfortable when I shifted to third person,
Mm.
because it's not just Willow trying to solve the mystery of what's happening on the island. It's me as the author saying, okay, I've made this puzzle. Can you solve it? To the reader. And
Mhm.
and that's one of the things I love about reading mysteries. It's like it's like you're in competition and I feel connected with the human who wrote the book, not just the characters in it, in trying to solve them. And very pleased with myself when I can, and very pleased with them when I can't, and pleased with all of us that it happens at all. So
I think that's one of the real joys of mystery reading is either when you solve the murder, you figure out who it is, like an Agatha Christie, then you're pleased with yourself. Or if you don't, but you can recognize how you were led down the garden path, you're still like, well, give her credit for being clever enough to do that. So it's
yep.
kind of a win-win both ways. You have mentioned a few of your authors as a reader that are favorites. Another person tuning in wondered, do you have any new books you would recommend, or newer, I guess, to readers?
Um, Okay, let's see. I mean, there's, as I've mentioned, some of the authors that I really enjoy. Gigi Pandian is working on her Secret Staircase series. I think she's going to be our modern master of the locked room mystery. She's so good at it. She gets me
Mhm.
every time. I've never worked out one of hers in advance. So I mean, and Olivia Black's series continuing. I really love Kemper Donovan's ghostwriting mysteries.
Yeah.
Those are just fun. Lori Raider Day's Wreck My Heart. Wreck My Heart, Wreck Your Heart. It's right up there. Wreck Your Heart. Lori Raider Day just came out. I just got my copy. I haven't read it yet, but I cannot wait to get to it. So those are some of my new favorites. Yeah, I've got other ones that I know everyone's read the Magpie Murders except me, I think. So, but I have it and I want to read it. I saw
Sometimes
a
you need,
meme recently that said it was something like, don't look at your to be read pile as a challenge or a task list. Look on it like a wine cellar of
Yes,
all of these. You pick the right book at the right time for the right occasion to just enjoy. So I'm trying
that's
to
a
do that.
very good way to look at it. I can't believe how quickly an hour has flown by. We've been very fortunate at the Poison Pen to have with us today author Jennifer K. Breedlove, whose new book is Murder Will Out, available at the Poison Pen and other fine bookstores and libraries. I'd like to thank Jennifer for sharing her thoughts with us and for writing such an amazing book. And thank you for tuning in to another virtual event with the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, in case I lose you, I'm going to click on buttons, but you did a terrific job.
Okay. Are we out? We're clear?
I think I'm still
Uh,
clicking stuff, so
Okay.
let me make sure.